Well, good evening and welcome to tonight's program sponsored by Metro West Climate Solutions Group. I'm Jeff Barsnell. I'm a Weston resident. I'm a member of the Metro West Climate Solutions Steering Committee, and I am your moderator for this evening's program. Metro West Climate Solutions' mission is to inspire sustainable, resilient, and equitable communities in our region, and to host timely and relevant programs and discussions that encourage people and organizations to get involved in taking the steps that we all need to take to move our state, our region, and our country towards a low carbon and more sustainable future. Metro West Climate Solutions, or MWCS, is a local partnership of organizations and congregations, including First Parish in Wayland, First Parish Church in Weston, First Parish in Lincoln, First Parish in Framingham, Energize Wayland, the Sustainable Weston Action Group, and a growing list of communities and individuals. More information can be found at our website, metrowestclimatesolutions.org. There you can find recordings of all of our past programs and information on our upcoming events. You can also sign up for our email announcements. If you do this, you will receive notice for our next program, which is an in-person hybrid presentation at First Parish in Lincoln on November, I will get that date, forgive me. I think it's November 12th. Yes, thank you. That program will be part 3 in our Climate Impacts in New England series and will feature Dr. Jonathan Thompson, Executive Director of Harvard Forest, who's presenting on the impacts of climate change on our forests. The shorthand title for his presentation is Missing the Forest and the Trees. As for tonight's program, we are delighted to welcome back Senator Mike Barrett as our guest. Before I introduce Senator Barrett, I do think it's important that we take a moment to note the larger context during which we meet this evening with respect to temperature and climate. Some of us are aware the last 15 months ending in August have each set new records for the hottest month in recorded history, with those with the data going back 175 terrifying trend. This is especially important since it is not only land temperatures that are setting new records, it is sea surface temperatures as well. They're setting new highs all over the world, with both 2000 and now 2024 setting alarmingly high numbers. The temperature of the water in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, is higher now than in any time in history. This explains how and why a tropical depression forming just a few days ago by the coast of eastern Mexico could so quickly organize and accumulate the energy of a Category 5 hurricane in a matter of hours. As we meet this evening, over 6 million residents are being asked to evacuate Central Florida in preparation for Hurricane Milton, whose now mercifully downgraded Category 4 winds are expected to make landfall sometime later tonight near Tampa. This was, of course, preceded by Hurricane Helene or Helena, which pummeled the Florida Panhandle before moving north over the higher elevations of Georgia and western North Carolina and dumping literally 12 to 15 inches of rain within a 24-hour period in that mountainous region. Over 200 people or more have been killed in that storm, and portions of western North Carolina have literally been washed away. It is going to take years to recover from the damage they have sustained. So the stakes are high, and they are getting higher here in North America and around the world. I could make a very similar introduction using recent typhoons in the Pacific to make my point, or the flooding in Vermont from a few summers ago. That is why current climate legislation here in Massachusetts and in the United States are of vital national and international importance. And Massachusetts has been a leader in that regard. And that is why we should be supporting and encouraging our political leaders to make the tough choices that will allow us as a region and as a nation to make the urgent transition to a low carbon world. something which needs to occur in phases over the next 20 to 25 years if we hope to avert the worst scenarios of climate change. So we welcome back Senator Barrett to Metro West Climate Solutions for an update and presentation about the current state of climate legislation here in the Commonwealth. The latest legislative session here in Massachusetts ended in a stalled bill, with the Senate and House being unable to negotiate a compromise agreement that would allow the legislation to pass. Among the other sticking points was a real disagreement about how and when to change the rules for how gas utilities operate and whether they should be allowed to spend $42 billion over the next 20 years to replace and upgrade natural gas infrastructure here in New England, here in Massachusetts, when the calls to phase out our reliance on fossil fuels grows more urgent and compelling. So we are pleased to have Senator Barrett back with us tonight, as he has been directly involved in shaping and negotiating climate legislation here in Massachusetts, both in the past and in the current, or the immediate past and current session. I should note that Senator Barrett serves the 3rd Middlesex Senate District, which includes the towns of Bedford, Carlisle, Chelmsford, Concord, Lincoln, Waltham, and Weston, and some large portions of Lexington. Among his many responsibilities and roles, he serves as the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy. This committee, the TUE, has its jurisdiction covers everything from cell phones to alternative energy to public utility reform and pricing. Senator Barrett was and is one of the 3 senators who were involved with negotiating a compromise climate bill with 3 of his colleagues from the House this last July and August. For tonight, we will first hear from Senator Barrett for his presentation, and then we will conclude with the time for questions and answers. You are invited to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen here in Zoom to offer a comment or pose a question. We will pose as many of the questions and comments as we can, given the limits of our time together tonight. And now, I would like to introduce and welcome back Senator Mike Barrett. Thank you for being with us this evening, Senator.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
I'm delighted to be here, and I permit me to start simply by offering a thank you to so many people who are in the audience, the virtual audience. In the last several years, the climate movement in Massachusetts, the citizen movement, has grown ever more influential and has really lit a fire under elected officials and decision makers at every level, heads of businesses, heads of nonprofits. You guys are doing a terrific job, and I'm wanted to be here in part to explain exactly where we are in our current negotiations. I'm going to approach the subject somewhat indirectly because my doing so, I hope, will provide context. First of all, I want to accentuate the positive. We've enacted 2 recent major climate bills in the last 2 legislative sessions. There was the Roadmap Bill of 2020, 2021, very important in terms of setting emission limits in every sector and subsector of the Massachusetts economy. So that was foundational in terms of telling us where we need to go. We need, of course, to reach net zero by 2050, and statutorily, that provision was part of the Roadmap Bill too. And then in 2022-3, we, in any event, last session, 2021, 2022, we did the so-called Drive Act. And there we started to focus on solutions. If the Roadmap Act told us what we need to get to, the Drive Act began to offer solutions, tools. Both of them were driven by a lot of pressure on the part of the public and on the part of activists. And that's why I'm so grateful, as I say, to a lot of folks who are listening this evening. So where are we in 2023, 2024? By the way, our legislative sessions are 2 years. So 2024, the end of this calendar year, is effectively the culmination of legislative efforts that began in January and February of 2023. And as I say, I want to approach this a little indirectly. there's good news, and then there's the rest of the news with respect to the climate movement in general, nationwide, perhaps worldwide, but certainly in Massachusetts. There was a time when you guys, people are just very concerned about the fate of the planet, were the driving force, and in many respects, the sole actors on the clean energy side of things, the save the planet side of things. There were, Lord knows, adversaries in the oil and gas industry nationwide and worldwide, but you were driving the counter argument that became, in many respects, the dominant argument. People now acknowledge, at least in the Northeast, that climate change is certainly real. But success brings, and the maturation of the movement gave rise to a second wing of the climate movement. The citizen grassroots wing predates and started us off, and has been, some of you have been working for years, really. The business or corporate wing of the climate movement is relatively newer. And for Massachusetts, really started with the emergence of the offshore wind business in 2021, 2022, last year, 2023. So here we had a situation where major players, primarily from Europe, were asked to bid for the right to build lots of offshore windmills in the ocean. New England and the Atlantic in general is ideal, right? If you're going to build windmills offshore that can port their energy to shore, where it's ideal because we have a shallow Atlantic coastal shelf. Unlike the Gulf of Mexico, unlike the West Coast, this underwater shelf means that our offshore wind pedestals can stand on solid ground. They don't have to float. So they're less expensive to build. And the winds off the coast of the Northeast are significantly powerful compared to winds elsewhere in the US. So we had the advantage of velocity, and we had the advantage of relative shallowness to the ocean floor. This was the place to start. And because we want to green the grid and substitute for oil and gas production, it was very important that we jump-started the offshore wind business. Ground-mounted solar has emerged as a serious actor, actually much more important in terms of the total number of megawatts it contributes today. And that's not only the panels on your roof behind the meter, meaning close to where you pay the bill. There's also a lot of stuff out in the part of the state and in the part of the New England region where land is a little less expensive, a lot of stuff on the ground, which is relatively inexpensive to build. So you've got ground-mounted solar, you have offshore wind, you have the possibility of porting electricity down from Quebec, where there are lots of hydroelectric dams, using transmission lines through the northern New England states. Very recently, you have the emergence of a storage industry. But here's my point. We desperately need to nurture these clean energy businesses, but their focus is complex and quite different from the grassroots wing of the climate movement. On the business side, there is a desire to be a part of a revolution, which we need to save us, to green the planet. However, these are also profit maximizing and profit seeking and revenue seeking entities. They need to make money, and they need to impress a worldwide community of investors, which might choose to, to put their money in artificial intelligence instead, or pharmaceuticals instead. So there's a competition for investment capital at a decent price, as it were. And these folks essentially have become very powerful in the State House. They include the gas utilities, the electric utilities, the offshore wind companies, the ground-mounted solar companies, the developers of storage, big batteries, basically, and the developers of nuclear has now become a major player. It's enjoying a resurgence in terms of its profile in the energy picture. The problem here is that there's a massive build out of any kind is, of course, a double-edged sword. Absolutely needed, very expensive. The grassroots folks, the ratepayers, the people who struggle to pay the monthly electric and gas bills, are going to essentially finance every penny of the build out of a new energy system. And so now you've got real tensions. And of course, you also have some tensions around community control and community voices versus statewide siting and permitting reform. We have these tensions in play, and the grassroots movement and the corporate wing of the climate movement are in a kind of never-ending dialogue, often yielding good outcomes, but sometimes yielding conflict that is difficult to resolve. Now let's bring the discussion to the state legislature. I'm of course most familiar with the perspective of the state Senate, so I want to express it. We see this tension between the grassroots wing of the climate movement and the corporate wing of the climate movement, and we want to make sure that one does not devour the other or completely subsume the other. Because right behind the grassroots climate movement are the enormous community again of regular Massachusetts families who pay the monthly gas and electric bills. If those bills get too high, even in the interest of doing a good thing, there is going to be a backlash. Some of us have lived through similar backlashes here in Massachusetts. We remember Prop 2.5, and before that, Prop 13 in California. We know that when prices really get unbearable for middle-class families and for poor families, there can be a surge to the right. And you might say that the worldwide reemergence of extreme right-wing politics in part has to do with increases in the cost of living. You can explain them by reference to the recent surge of inflation. You can certainly point to the invasion of Ukraine. You can talk about the supply chain disruptions attributable to the pandemic. But increasingly, sometimes unfairly, folks are attributing increases in the cost of living to this massive changeover we need to make to the clean energy, or rather to the energy systems, the generation of the stuff and the delivery of the stuff over transmission lines or through pipes. The Senate wants to make sure that there isn't a backlash, basically. And so our idea is to ensure that there is some kind of balance at every critical point. So we certainly want to see a build out of the transmission system and the distribution system with respect to electricity. We also know, though, that there are going to be additions to your monthly electric bill attributable to this build out, which is going to take place over 25 years. It's not one massive construction project. It's an ongoing and almost never ending sequence of construction projects, some of them quite expensive. They're going to be constantly feeding additional costs onto the monthly bill. But then you also have offshore wind. We had to blow up some contracts because they were negotiated pre-pandemic, pre-inflation. We needed to help these companies remain in business, and their contracts wouldn't have permitted them to run in the black. I was supportive of blowing up those contracts. But those companies are coming back in promising to resume construction of an offshore wind universe for the state, but at significantly higher rates. Then you've got the porting of electricity down from Quebec. The original contract is going to be quite affordable, but after that, any additional electricity we get is going to come at a premium. You've got nuclear, and we're talking about one plant in New England and Millstone in Connecticut, a second plant, Seabrook, near the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border in New Hampshire. Those two operations say, look, we want the sweet deal you're giving to the offshore wind people. We want, in other words, guaranteed prices for fill in the blank, 20 years, regardless of what the market might generate. We want to lock in charges that people will pay us, or we may shut down. And the offshore wind people are telling us too, we may not decide to build those windmills off the coast of Massachusetts at all, unless you lock in our prices for fill in the blank, 20 years today, but they'd like to go to 30, which would be much more expensive than the status quo. So we've got these folks coming at us, adding costs on your electric side. The Senate's perspective here is that many of these costs are unavoidable because we do have to translate an entire set of status quo situations to something entirely new. We want to create offsets, though. We want to make sure that if your electric bill is going to go up, your gas bill not go up concomitantly. And there's a real problem because the same revenue generating forces that want to build out new electric power generation and new electric power transmission and distribution resources also want to keep building out the old system because there's a lot of money there too, right? Eversource and especially National Grid wants to make sure that we pay premium to keep gas going and pay premium to keep electricity going. That is a recipe for a right-wing reaction against the climate agenda. Which is what the Senate is trying to avoid. So our proposition this year in terms of climate legislation was, look, electric bills are going up. We get it, and we support it, and we've crafted policies which are going to effectively funnel costs to people who pay monthly electric bills. So let's give people relief on the gas bill. Gas is the old system. That's not going away tomorrow. We know we're going to be on gas a long time, but it needs to be in diminishing quantity. And we've got to make sure that you don't add new gas infrastructure. And every time you put a new pipe into the ground in Massachusetts for gas, it's going to be there for 30 to 50 years. Now think about it. We're supposed to be at net zero in terms of statewide emissions in 25 years. But the pipes we're putting into the ground will easily last into the 2060s and the 2070s, and you'll be paying for it. One of our calculations, and it's a good one, is that you'll be paying for any new natural gas pipe you put into the ground. Well, it could be until the year 2097, because these things are amortized over a very long span of time. So build out the electric grid, you gotta. Build out the gas grid at the same time, you're bargaining for a very, very fierce pushback on the part of consumers once they realize they can't manage both bills in double time as they compound and grow larger and larger. In short, the Massachusetts Senate included a number of provisions that in measured ways, no one's going to lose their gas heat, and no one's going to see an explosion either. We're going to repair the system. We're going to keep people warm, but we're going to start to consider alternative ways to keep you warm that aren't polluting. And we're going to always have an eye on our emissions goals and reductions objectives, so that we've got to take a very careful but discernible retreat from gas in careful stages as we charge into an electric power future. The House disagrees with that fundamental proposition, or rather, they might express general agreement, but they disagree with us on all the particulars. They know that we've got to work our way off gas in general. They just don't want to work off gas specifically in terms of doing anything in particular. Now this is they have a reasonable position, and my House colleague and I get along very well personally. He's a good proponent of our building out both systems and the necessity, he would say, of our doing so. But we're also engaging in dialogue. Slowly, I think the Senate's position is getting a hearing in the House, and I really respect again, the House chair's receptivity here. They've got some stuff that we're not going to talk about tonight on climate policy. I mean, that we want to give in exchange for getting reductions in the gas system. There will be a negotiation in which both sides win, but we want to make sure that increases in your electric bill are offset by decreases or at least constraints on your gas bill. That's key. There are other important aspects of the Senate bill, but I want to keep this conversation relatively focused so that we can get to your questions and your comments and your advice. I believe that the House and Senate conferees on TUE may well come to a good resolution of these differences, because while I'm trying to outline them crisply for you tonight, of course, there are many, many members of the House of Representatives who realize that you don't want to build out both systems double time at once, that family budgets are going to break if you do. So what we have to do is to take a general consensus that does exist, that ratepayers need help. We have to take it and we need to translate it into particular policy prescriptions, which, by the way, aren't very radical. I do have to mention what the Senate is trying to do particularly, so that you can appreciate how reasonable I think these changes are. We have a program, a very pricey program, to replace old leaky gas pipes with new stuff. And right now, the legislative language only talks about, well, replacement, which means you take out the old pipe, even if it could be repaired and being given a significant number of additional years of life. We take it out completely and we put in the new stuff that will last, remember, for 30 to 50 years, and you'll be paying for it long past the year 2050. We just want to add the verb repair whenever the verb replace currently appears, so that you would have two verbs that have to do with this statute repairing leaky natural gas pipes. You could replace them when they need to be taken out of the ground whole cloth, or you could repair them, and we would require that the repairs last at least a decade, ideally longer. We would like to add, the Senate would, a third verb too, retire, because there are times when you can retire the stretch of gas pipe altogether, since you have something called network geothermal being piloted in Framingham and Lowell and in a housing project in the city of Boston. At times, you're going to be able to put in non-polluting replacements for an entire street section, streetscape. So the Senate position, and the one that's currently met with so much resistance, and I might say I'm very disappointed with the governor's position so far on this stuff, but I can appreciate that she's desperate because we didn't act by July 31st. But all the Senate's trying to do is to add two verbs, repair and retire, to the current verb replace. And then we would let the DPU and the utilities figure out which of the three verbs take precedence in any given project. That's it, really. That's the biggest chunk. There's some other interesting things, but you get my drift. What we're fundamentally proposing to do is to give the state agency, the Department of Public Utilities, additional tools. We're not mandating that they choose any one solution. We know that if you want to save people money, long-term repair has to be there as well as full-bore replacement, and the possibility of retirement has to be there as well as repair and replace. So that's what we're fighting about. I like to think, of course I'm biased, but I like to think the Senate position is disarmingly reasonable. I also am very optimistic that we can persuade the governor to go along, and that we can persuade the House that our position is not radical but sensible. It is difficult. This is quite a moment. The governor invested all her prestige in siting and permitting reform, figuring out a way to clear away obstacles to the construction of new electric power systems and substations and these transmission lines and distribution lines. So she decided to take a one-dimensional step after the House and the Senate failed to meet their nominal deadline of July 31st this year. She decided just to go with the siting and permitting stuff using a second channel, an obscure budgetary device. I'd like to persuade the governor and her people to step back. I think they did act prematurely. The legislature disregards its self-imposed deadlines all the time. It's not elegant. It doesn't make us look great, but it's what we do. And we usually get to a solution on our own if we're left alone. In this case, a plan B emerged very quickly from a governor who perhaps halfway into just her first term didn't realize that there is a sense in which the legislature was still just about its business, and that we would probably get there where she wanted us to be, but with a more comprehensive bill that protects ratepayers. So I'm going to close with this thought. The entire world at times seems to be in chaos, right? You've got people feeling unhappy about the state of the world. And here in the US, Donald Trump's prospects rest on people feeling that inflation is just relentless, even though inflation's going down now. And even though unemployment's been very low. Even so, people, for some reason, feel the need to throw everything overboard. I don't want the climate issue, which is going to be an expensive proposition, to contribute to that feeling of alienation, because once you go there, once you allow the Donald Trumps of the world, or the Viktor Orbans of the world, or the Giorgia Meloni's of the world in Italy, or the Marine Le Pen's in France, or of course the Putins in Russia, or the Xi Jinping's in China, to exploit people's unhappiness, you certainly destroy the climate movement or raise almost insurmountable obstacles to its quick success, but you're also threatening democracy itself. The prospect of high electric bills has to be offset with lower gas bills. We can't afford to have a massive surge of popular dissatisfaction with our attempts to solve the planetary existential crisis of our time. So that's where we are. As I say, I'm optimistic that the House and the Senate can agree that some of these common sense changes to gas policy work and will actually help us maintain a consensus going forward on behalf of climate reform and green energy. Jeff, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank Metro West Climate Solutions for sponsoring this event. I look forward to hearing questions. I want to ask for your help. I want to ask for the assistance of everybody listening. It would be nice, of course, if you agreed with me, but regardless of where you stand, it's very important that you reach out to your members of your House and the Senate and tell them that climate is important and that it does have to be resolved. Not, I hope, in the narrowest of terms, having to do with siting and permitting only. That's, of course, again, increases to your electric bill only. We do want the corresponding relief on the gas side, but again, that's your call as a listener. The important thing is that the legislature be permitted to pursue this process longer without it being short-circuited in a manner that would throw overboard all the protections for ratepayers in the Senate legislation. That's my biased conclusion, Jeff, and there we go.
Biased but informed, Senator Barrett. So we thank you for your explanation and for your dogged leadership here and for laying out some of the important factors and considerations in implementing a very complex plan for decarbonizing our region, our society, and our economy here. Not easy to do, while also minimizing the impact on the people who might be least able to manage such a transition, which is what I hear you saying. There's we're getting a lot of congratulations to you also, Senator Barrett, because you have in your 30 minutes of presenting elicited many different comments and questions that we're going to get to, which is great. But it's clear that you are keeping an eye on the impacts for not just those who can afford to install solar panels on their roofs, which isn't everyone. You're keeping an eye on all those people who may not necessarily afford an EV or an electric vehicle right now.
Jeff, you're absolutely right. But I do want to emphasize this is what the Senate's trying to do here is draw attention to low-income neighborhoods, but also the working class and the middle class. There are lots of middle-class families who are going to find themselves stretched by increases on the electric side. We've got to protect them. They have to realize that the legislature has their backs and that we're doing all we can to bring down costs in the fossil fuel system.
Absolutely. So let me just a point of clarification. It sounds like the big point of disagreement had to do with how best to change the rules with respect to gas utilities and how they build out, repair, or replace their gas pipeline infrastructure. Is that correct? Were there any other major points of debate?
I do want to mention a couple of others, just because people can appreciate that this stuff is both complex, although it is possible to understand it as well. Buried in state law and unrelated to the replacement specifically of leaky pipes is a right to gas. Nobody in Massachusetts has a right to be warm. but there's a specific right to sue to have gas brought to your house if it's in the general vicinity. That right to gas right now is unrestricted. It's a competitive advantage that we're throwing to the gas utilities, but not throwing to the oil and propane businesses. We don't throw that advantage to the installers of heat pumps. There's specifically buried in state law an explicit right to gas heat only that you can sue on the basis of. So yes, we would like to change that. We don't want to take it away completely, but we ask the DPU, which would sit as the judge, as it were, for these petitions, to consider our greenhouse gas emissions needs and our need to reduce greenhouse gases when they consider these requests to get gas service, which essentially would build the system out more. In other words, we wouldn't only not keep it constrained, we would actually add to the gas system, which we're supposedly going to abandon by 2050, pretty much, except for hard to decarbonize sectors of the economy. Certainly for home heat, we need to get off gas. And so we do want to change this right to gas. I want to mention one other thing because it's important. It does have to do with low-income neighborhoods. It's an environmental justice issue. We have people going door to door in poor neighborhoods to sell what an essential are financing plans for people who don't have a lot of money. This is like payday lending. And these folks will knock on your door in Dorchester and Mattapan and Roxbury, but also in South Boston and in Chelsea. And they say, look, we have this great deal. You'll pay less than if you get your electricity from National Grid or your electricity from Eversource. What they don't tend to explain is that there are balloon payments at the end, so that over the entire course of a contract, low-income folks wind up paying more, but they're desperate. They want that immediate financial relief. They may be out of work, so they go for the short-term savings, which is what payday lending is all about too, loan sharking, basically. Competitive supply, as it actually operates in low-income neighborhoods, is loan sharking. And the Senate, again, would like to introduce some constraints. We're not going to abandon it altogether, but here's an example of a reform that's meeting with resistance. We say, look, no automatic renewals. These contracts can't run longer than 2 or 3 years. You're going to have to resell the proposition, the value proposition you purportedly offer to that poor family after they've had a chance to see how you operate and how their bills run over the course of time. And so we don't want to automatically renew for another 3 years in a way that people hardly notice. You know, the way these automatic renewals happen to all of us. We want you to have to go back out and re-argue the merits of you being the alternative provider. At the moment, we cannot get the House to agree to do away with automatic renewals, which is the way the competitive suppliers keep low-income families on the hook for ages. Again, the Senate doesn't have to win on everything, but the Senate is very concerned about the impact on poor people of those kinds of predatory practices. We would like to see restraints on competitive suppliers operating in low-income areas. That too is a part of the Senate bill. I don't want to. There's plenty of other things, but I don't want to bore you stiff.
No, that's helpful though to understand the larger context, because I know you know, especially with those alternative power suppliers, that has been an unregulated market where lots of low-income folks have been exploited. That's for sure.
And by the way, we're not talking about municipal aggregation.
Right.
There, you've got a fair fight. You've got an entire town hiring consultants to negotiate with the competitive suppliers consultants, oftentimes resulting in a very good price. But these same companies circumvent the municipal aggregation route and go door to door, and that's where the abuses happen, and that's not cool.
Yes. No. Good point. And I'm surprised that there is actually any you know, debate or contention about that topic. Just a point of clarification for our viewers, and we still have almost 100 folks with us tonight, Senator Barrett. I just want to confirm, partly rhetorical on my part, but I just want to confirm there is no way that we can achieve our climate reduction goals, our greenhouse gas reduction goals, without phasing out or dramatically reducing our reliance on natural gas pipelines and combustion. Is that, I think there's pretty widespread consensus about that. Correct?
Dramatic reduction over time. I
Over
want to
time,
stress that
over time, over
we're
time.
not talking about a turning off of one system. That's unrealistic. And I also want to emphasize, and then we want to go to questions and comments. I want to emphasize that the House has a lot of good ideas of its own. They are very strong on the corporate wing of the climate movement, helping to build out the business sector, which is going to create a lot of jobs for Massachusetts. I'm all for the corporate wing of the climate movement, but I want to balance it with the citizens wing and the concerns that they have.
Any thoughts about the governor's or the DPU's proposal to create an electric clean heat standard?
Well, I listen, the star, I really want to pay homage to the DPU. I've been critical of the governor's circumventing of the legislative process prematurely, but she has a great DPU, and they are doing very good things. So it's a mixed bag at the moment, but we need to bring her back into the champions corner where she's really our friend in every respect, because we do have to find some smart way to slowly move away from gas.
Well, and it seems to be like giving a, some sort of rate for those who are heating with electricity in the wintertime could be a prudent way to go, depending.
Well, there are lots of possibilities here.
Yeah. So let's see. So we got all sorts of questions here. So let me, what is needed to get the climate bill passed that includes a prohibition on expanding natural gas infrastructure and incentive for utilities to expand the capacity of the electric grid, including the use of high capacity, high voltage wire materials?
Well, we've got to communicate with your legislators now in the month of October and ask for a balanced, comprehensive bill rather than a narrower product. That's the timing is now key.
Someone asks which legislators are currently on the fence, and can we who we can contact to advocate for an improved climate bill. And I'm not going to ask you to name names, Senator Barrett, but perhaps we could just encourage everyone to be in touch with their legislator.
The key thing is there's not a lack of will. The legislative delegation, our legislature, including the Massachusetts House, is terrific. The awkward thing for a legislator always, though, is to approach her leader, Speaker Mariano or the Senate President, and say, you know what, here's what my constituents are telling me. We have to go big on this climate business. We can't go skinny. This is the time when you have to approach your good state rep and your good state senator and say, please, please, please talk to the speaker. Please talk to the Senate President. Get this thing going.
Question, you mentioned offshore wind. What can be done to make offshore wind economically attractive for wind turbine companies to expand electricity supply in Massachusetts?
Well, this is the answer is what we've done. We let them tear up the contracts they had signed with us.
Yep.
Where they were going to sell us electricity at a good rate. And we said, and we had to do this gritting our teeth, but recognizing global realities, we said, you get to a do-over. You'll come back in, you'll bid at a much higher price. And we know that, but it's important to make sure that you guys can operate in the black. However, remember, the corporate wing of the climate movement is also profit seeking. So they're not going to stop at a decent rate of return. If they can pump up the rate of return, they'll go for a little extra. So right now, in addition to having let them blow up the old contracts, they're actually looking for some additional advantages, each of which will cost you additional money. They want to go from a 20-year PPA, that's a technical term for locked-in rate, to a 30-year PPA, like a 30-year mortgage will cost you a lot more money as a ratepayer. I'm not sure. I know they needed to walk away from those old contracts, and I stood with them. and got some criticism for it. Now I think they may be pushing their luck a little bit, and it worries me that they aren't stopping at 20 years, but instead kind of going for the gusto in every respect.
And just for the record, PPA is power purchase agreement.
That's right.
That we're clear. Is there any way we can achieve our climate goals without transitioning to a greater reliance on offshore wind and hydro and nuclear power, in your opinion?
No.
That's what I thought. Yep. It's important to get that out there. Hence your argument that we absolutely are going to have to incur higher electricity prices in order to make this urgent and an essential transition.
But what you need to be shopping for and pushing for with your elected officials, beginning with the governor, is a sense of judgment, a sense of balance. Yes, it's going to be pricey. It doesn't mean that it has to be overpriced. The industry doesn't know when to stop. They would go for overpricing and maximum revenue to themselves if they were left free. That's why you need this dialectic tension between the private sector and the public. We need to be defending the ratepayers, and I worry that we are deferring a tad too much to our green partners in the private sector.
Interesting point. Someone asked, there's a fascinating question based on your argument about maintaining the cost of gas prices, or at least preventing them from going up markedly. They write, we are converting our home to 100% electric. Good for you. Decreases in our gas bill are irrelevant to us and to others. Doesn't allowing major increase rates while giving price relief to users of gas discourage people from moving to an all-electric future or scenario? What is the prospect?
No, go on.
No, it just says, what is the prospect of a future carbon tax in Massachusetts?
Well, I'm a very strong proponent of a carbon tax and entered the legislature in 2013 advocating for one. I got nowhere. A carbon tax tends to be perceived of, not entirely unreasonably, as a tax. We devised very complicated ways of redistributing the money back to the ratepayers in a way that would hold people harmless, especially the middle class, the working class, and the poor. But still, I failed to make the sale. There are very few takers. At the moment, carbon taxation, at least direct carbon taxation, is not popular. But there are lots of ways of making sure that fossil fuel bears its true costs. Some of them are indirect and enter the conversation under different labels, but they get the job done. So I am in favor of building in all the costs of fossil fuel into the price. However, if you layer on top of those prices stuff you don't need, like completely replacing a new strengths of gas pipe when you could repair it instead, you start layering on those surplus costs. Helps the utilities. They love it. They'll take every penny they can get. It really starts, though, to build the backlash that I've talked about earlier. That's what I'm concerned about. Reasonable constraints at the same time that true pricing finds its proper level.
Fair enough. Let's see. How do we advocate then, Senator Barrett, for fixing leaks in the gas system, which cause substantial climate damage because of the methane, while not supporting an expansion of the gas system that will reverberate for decades? This kind of brings us back to the point that the larger point that gas utilities their business model is predicated on delivering gas, obviously, where they don't make a lot of profit, and repairing or expanding their replacing their gas pipeline, where they're able to bill the ratepayers for that and make a profit. Right? That's their business.
Well, it's kind of it's a weird and complicated business. Delivering the fuel, the actual gas, takes place often, of course, across state lines. The gas may come from Pennsylvania or from the Alleghenies. You've got other gas coming in as liquefied natural gas into a terminal and its origins are often European or Asian. Uh, our utilities don't make money on the fuel. The part of the bill that I'm concerned about is the physical infrastructure. That's where they make their money, to your point, Jeff. They pass on the price of the fuel as it's fixed by a Pennsylvania seller or a seller of gas somewhere in Europe. But the physical pipes, yes, that's where Eversource and National Grid and Unitel make their money. And again, you want to enable them to make their money, but you've got to be vigilant against overpricing, and we're not being strong enough. The sum total increases in the gas bill and increases in the electric bill, bad news.
Uh,
And by the way, let me respond to that question by saying the way you repair leaks and still give people relief is by putting this verb repair next to the verb replace in current law. And you also add the verb retire so that non-polluting network geothermal and other substitutions for natural gas can be contemplated by the Department of Public Utilities as well. So you go from replace to 3 verbs: replace, repair, retire, and you start to give us the tools we need to enable people to avoid unnecessary cost increases on the gas side.
And let me just note that the problem and challenge of gas leaks is significant here in Eastern New England and Massachusetts. In fact, Nathan Phillips from Boston University,
Yeah,
groups
done
like
great work.
Heat in Cambridge have done some great work just documenting how much of a problem gas leaks are, and how the gas utilities are simply not incentivized to repair them. So for what it's worth, since in fact, that report is great, is a good read.
I agree.
In rough percentage terms, how large is the annual average impact on ratepayers' gas bills if the Senate legislation is not passed?
The rates are set by the DPU, and of course they're forward facing into the future. So I can't give you a dollar figure for how much we can. But I can give you a ballpark. You mentioned $42 billion, Jeff.
I did, and
in your
yes, over the next 20 years, $42 billion expenditure over the next 20 years.
And that's just to replace leaky gas pipes. That's just on the gas side. You're talking about 42 billion. We figure we can cut that in half if we can have retirements and repairs playing a role as well as full bore replacement. So there's billions of dollars in potential savings at a time, remember, when there are also going to be billions of additional dollars in spending on the electric side facing you.
Sure.
So we've got to give people a shot, and we've got to help poor people. But I want to emphasize, it's the working class and the middle class that fuels Trumpism, nationwide authoritarian governments worldwide. Let's not assume there couldn't be. There could be a conservative counter-reaction in Massachusetts also. I see local legislative races happening that are very different tonally in terms of where they were even 10 years ago. So we want to avoid the backlash by doing the right thing by the people who pay the monthly bills.
What do you say to people who raise the issue of energy security as we cut back our reliance on natural gas for power generation here in New England, Senator?
Oh, we got to do it in a measured fashion. Part of the roadmap bill, by the way, in general, added energy security and, of course, safety to the considerations the DPU has to bring to every decision it makes. Traditionally, the DPU just considered reliability and affordability of either gas or electricity. The legislature in 2021 added safety, added security, and by that I mean security against hacks and against sabotage. We also added equity because we want the system to be fair to people who don't have a lot of money, and we added reductions, of course, in greenhouse gas emissions. So we added climate, safety, security, and equity to the traditional objectives of affordability and reliability. The DPU now operates under a 6-part mission. I think it's a pretty good way to equalize things, and it's in that spirit that the new Senate bill again, proposes balance. We lawyers like to talk about a balancing test. Really, that's all these gas controversies are about. The Senate's proposing balancing test the DPU uses when it decides on a gas system expansion or when it shapes the repair, replacement, or retirement of a stretch of gas pipe. We're just looking for the balancing test to kick in so that we can get things right.
Would the DPU, Department of Public Utilities, set the timetable for reducing natural gas and electricity production to achieve net zero by 2050? Or
well,
would that be legislature?
the legislature in the end has to step in and set the basic rules of the game, and then the DPU comes along and fills in a lot of the detail.
What would you hope to see in terms of an expected mix of renewable energy sources and expectations, say 20 years out? Where would we like? I mean, I've read reports that, New England could rely more than 100% on offshore wind in January and February if we got the right energy storage and transmission resources or infrastructure in place. Any thought about what be reasonable? I mean, there's several steps from here to there, I would think.
Well, Jeff, what's really been sobering in the last 2 or 3 years is that we put most of our hopes in 2021, 2022 on offshore wind. That was the focus of a significant part of the so-called DRIVE Act. We thought it was going to create oodles of jobs, and we thought it was going to be our leading solution. Clearly, a lot's happened in the offshore wind field, and new things happened. It was one thing to deal with inflation, but months after inflation emerged and supply chain disruption emerged as two serious problems, we started losing those blades, which has caused a loss of confidence in the industry, quite apart from inflation and supply chain. So we probably focus too much on offshore wind, although it needs to be a part of the mix. We focus too little on solar. Solar is much more important than offshore wind today. In fact, we get almost nothing from offshore wind today. We get many more megawatts from solar, and that's true for the New England region too. We have a New England grid, so we need to think in terms of a 6-state solution here. We probably we need to keep pushing offshore wind. We need to be more attentive to solar. We need a lot more solar panels on roofs, a lot more. There's controversy always with ground mounted. We're going to need that too, but we need much more, many more solar panels on the roofs of Weston, the roofs of Lexington, the roofs of Framingham, the roofs of Salem, the roofs of Danvers, Peabody. So there's lots of rooftop left. And if anything, we ought to be overbuilding on solar, picking up as much wind as we possibly can, but we're paying too little. And I'll tell you why. Again, let's go back to the corporate wing of the climate movement. Big projects, massive central projects, reminiscent of the old-time oil and gas utilities, are the favorite of governors because they're easy to understand. I'm going to build an offshore windmill that will have 70 turbines, and it's going to take the place of it's going to generate enough power to illuminate hundreds of thousands of houses. Governors like big headlines. Solar is decentralized, but is much more potent cumulatively, and we're paying too little attention to solar, and we're chasing big headlines with wind. We need them both, but we're getting a little out of whack right now in terms of our policy emphases.
It's a both and not an either or that we need to
Correct.
implement over time. Senator, I'm aware of the time, so we have 2 more questions and then we will conclude. I want to congratulate you for keeping your audience tonight. We still have a good group of people here in attendance.
Well, I'm grateful to people
coming in. I apologize. We're not going to be able to get through all of these questions, but given what happened with the stalled negotiations in August, someone asked if you would be willing to describe the role of utility companies in the State House and the efforts by their representatives to block efforts to transition away from gas? And you can answer, I understand, uh, any answer, diplomatic or otherwise, is welcome here, Senator.
Well, let me just make an observation. The climate wing, I should say, I'm sorry, the grassroots wing of the climate movement has to counter the corporate wing, which has much more money to hire lobbyists in general. That would include the gas utilities, but it also includes the clean energy developers. It includes the developers of storage. Somehow the grassroots, which started this whole business and which has led the movement nationwide, has to really reassert itself, because the corporate wing is now very well staffed up and is chasing hundreds of millions of dollars in potential revenue. That's great, but we need this creative tension between the grassroots and the corporate wing. And I'm concerned in the State House that sometimes the paid up lobbyists for the gas utilities or for the clean energy developers can overwhelm the grassroots piece. What the grassroots has that the corporate folks don't have is votes and the ability to influence local media and local nonprofit organizational activity. So you've got advantages that the moneyed interests don't have. We need both, but right now, at least with respect to this climate bill, the climate movement, the grassroots movement, is getting the short end of the stick. That's but I'm hoping, but it's not too late. Remember, it's not too late, and I want to emphasize that.
Where can those of us who are interested in lobbying ourselves as citizens and volunteers for legislation, where can we go in addition to calling our legislators and representatives? Where can we go? What should we do?
Well, written communications are in fact critical. Remember, we're on a very short leash now. We're talking 30 days, 45 days, and this whole thing has to get resolved. So you got to reach out to the governor. You got to let her know that we shouldn't go for a so-called skinny bill, just a siting and permitting reform. We've got to have a robust bill that includes relief for the gas bills. So the governor needs to hear from you. The Speaker and the Senate President need to hear from you, and your rank and file legislators. It is the forum now is the legislature. That's not always the case. Often it's the communities. Grassroots activity in your town or city is often the place to be. But in the next 45 days, it's the State House, and we need to hear from you. We've got to come up with a more robust and a more balanced approach to this.
So letters to Governor Healy and Speaker Mariano, among others.
And the Senate, and then the Senate President. The Senate's doing a great job, but the Senate President needs to be thanked for a good bill, and I'm not sure that she's thanked enough. We're really by ourselves at the moment. We're kind of outnumbered a little bit by the governor and the House together. We're all friends. We all know each other, so I don't want to accentuate the differences too much. But the truth is that Karen Spilka is standing alone, and she needs to be thanked for that.
Fair enough. Good point. And finally, I just thought we'd step back for a moment and just ask you as a citizen, as someone who's lived in Massachusetts for a long time, as a husband, a father, neighbor, two questions. And we've asked different guests this over the last few years. Number one, what keeps you up at night when you're thinking about issues of climate and sustainability? And two, what gives you hope?
Well, what keeps me up, it's a stressful job. I won't pretend otherwise. I do have trouble sleeping. And lately, in the last several months, I have trouble sleeping every night. I always wake up at 2:30 or 3, and I'm always focused on what I've got to get done the next day. And usually it involves, persuading other decision makers to join us in a more robust effort. Every day there are particular obstacles to be overcome. On the optimism side, though, I am, like all of you, fundamentally blown away by how decent people are one-on-one. I know people want to do the right thing, whether they're with us on this climate issue or whether they're concerned instead with job losses that might accrue to gas workers. Fundamentally, people want to do the right thing. I do believe in human beings, and that's what keeps me going. Most of the human beings I know are pretty good folks.
Fair enough. Thank you, Senator Michael Barrett, for being with us this evening and for being the source and object of such a stimulating and informative program. We are delighted that you could come back to Metro West Climate Solutions Group, and I hope you will consider coming back again for continuing conversation in the future.
Jeff, thank you for your leadership and for the leadership of the people on this call. I know you're out there. You started this. Now is the time to really bear down. Of course, we have to elect a president too.
And I encourage all of us on our Zoom program tonight to reach out to Speaker Mariano, reach out to Governor Healy, and reach out to Senator President Spilka and offer your recommendations and clear asks with respect to a clear and binding and far-reaching climate bill that should have been passed in the last session. Let's see if we can get done sooner than later. Thank you all for coming tonight. Our next program, again, will be on November 12th. It's a Tuesday night, November 12th, 7 p.m. With Executive Director of Harvard Forest, looking at the changing role of forests in combating climate change. For all of us at Metro West Climate Solutions, we thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.